Welcome to Learn, Lead, Go, the podcast designed to support your growth and leadership in life. I'm your host, DeNeen Attard, and this episode is part of our Women Who Lead series, where we highlight incredible women who are making an impact through their expertise and experience. Today's conversation focuses on one of the most essential skills we all rely on. Communication. Joining us today is Dr. Melissa Cancel, CEO of the Communication Doc, and a college professor with over 30 years of teaching experience. With a PhD in communications, Dr. Cancel has dedicated her career to helping people improve how they communicate, navigate conflict, and build stronger, more meaningful connections. In this episode, we'll explore common communication mistakes, the importance of aligning what you say with how you say it, the role of empathy in relationships, and how to adapt your communication style when working with different personalities and backgrounds. Dr. Cancel, welcome to Learn, Lead, Go.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be here with you today, DeNeen.
Melissa, I am excited to have you on the show as well, because when I think about communication, I think that it is one of the hot spots when it comes to leadership strategy and leadership success, team building, and all of those things that contribute to us being a great leader and getting our team to be able to follow our direction. When we think about some of the common mistakes people make when trying to resolve conflicts, what are some of the top 2 or 3 that come to mind?
I would say first is our tendency, most people fall into one of 2 categories. Either they blow up or they clam up. So you've got the people who react emotionally, which once our emotions get involved in conflict, pretty much all rational thought goes out the window. And so we're now no longer able to really focus on the issues and resolve the conflict successfully. Or you have on the opposite side the people who clam up and would prefer not to deal with conflict. The problem is that we end up then what I call gunny sacking, where we throw our conflicts into a bag, and it's not like we're really accepting them and moving beyond them. We're just trying to stash them away, and eventually that bag gets so heavy that then we try to deal with it all at one time. I say we try to hit another person with the entire sack at one time. That doesn't work very well either. So those 2 extremes are a major issue in conflict. I would say a second major issue is the lack of perspective taking that we have when it comes to our relationships. We tend to get so focused on our own perspective, what we saw, what we heard, what we thought it meant, and we don't take time to stop and think, wait a minute, what might that person have been experiencing? What might they have been feeling? What might they have meant? What are other interpretations? And so when we jump to those assumptions based on our own perspective, that often creates conflicts that wouldn't necessarily have been there if we were able to stop and see things from the other person's perspective. So those are 2 major issues. If I were to pick a third, I would probably say that it would be the ability to focus truly on what the issue of the conflict is. We get caught up often in focusing on the behavior, not the behavior, but the personality and the character that we assign to whatever the behavior is. So let's say, for example, my husband is supposed to call somebody about fixing our water heater that's broken, and he doesn't do it when he's supposed to. Well, I'm more likely to assign that behavior to a personality trait like you always procrastinate, as opposed to thinking, okay, that's not necessarily the issue. The issue is this specific behavior of not calling. And so when I start pulling in character and personality, now we've got a much bigger issue as opposed to what was the specific issue that prompted the conflict. So those would be probably my three top.
And even though you gave the example of a husband and wife, that application can still apply to the workplace setting with the leader and their team member. Because oftentimes when we are working as leaders, when we're working with our team members, we have created this image of the reason why the person responded to it and their motives and all of those things to why their behavior is the way it is. And I think that if we step back and do what you said, we have a more realistic view of the situation, and then we're able to respond accordingly.
I totally agree. And that's the thing with all of the skills that I'm teaching, they could apply to any relationship communication situation, whether it be coworkers communicating with each other or subordinates, supervisors, or friends or parents and children. There are different dynamics in every situation based on authority. For example, status can play in. So there are some differences that play into slight alterations, but communication skills are across the board effective in whatever relationship. So if I teach a married couple how to communicate more effectively, they're going to communicate better at work. They're going to communicate better with their children. And the conflict management training that I've developed, I could work with married couples and do it in a seminar for them, or I could take it into the corporate world and do it for, businesses, and it would be essentially the exact same.
Sometimes when we're talking and engaging with individuals, the words that come out of our mouth do not align with our nonverbal communication. What are some practical ways people can ensure that they say what they mean?
That is a great question, because most of us know, based on just common phrases like actions speak louder than words, it is actually true that we believe nonverbal communication more than we believe verbal communication. And estimates vary depending on exactly what you include, but on average, we say that about 67 to 70% of a message's meaning is communicated nonverbally. The problem arises in that our verbal communication is much more conscious to us. We have to consciously choose the words we're going to communicate. But our nonverbal communication is much more subconscious. That is, we tend to do it habitually, or it tends to flow from our emotions. And so we have to actually stop and think about and become aware of what we're communicating nonverbally in order to be sure that it's consistent with our verbal. I always tell people, when it comes to the verbal side, across the board, my biggest recommendation is to carefully think before you speak. Because there's a Chinese proverb that says, once a word goes out of your mouth, you can never swallow it back again. We can deal with, the ramifications of what we said and try to fix it afterwards, but the reality is once it's out there, it's out there. And if we would simply take the time to think about what we're saying before we say it, there would be a lot of things we don't say. And then the things that we do say would be more likely to be in line with the appropriateness of the situation and the effectiveness of what we're trying to accomplish. But then when it comes to our nonverbal communication, we really have to become aware of what we're communicating. We can do that through asking other people. So when I say something to my husband and he says to me something about my tone of voice, well, rather than just assuming, he just read me wrong, I should learn from those situations and say, okay, well, what was it about my tone of voice that you thought I meant it in that way? Because if that was not my intent, then clearly something was communicated nonverbally to him that I was not aware of. And that's something that we all have to be willing to accept and to get feedback from other people. I would say if it's a issue that you are continue to have problems with, I would record myself in different various situations speaking and watch my nonverbal communication, because it's so subconscious that if we don't make ourselves aware of it, we're never going to be able to correct it. And so that really has to be where you become nonverbally aware, and then you can start matching your nonverbal communication to make sure it's consistent with your verbal.
And sometimes that can be a very difficult thing to do, because we get so caught up in our own mission, and we think that what we said was said correctly, or the other person is overreacting. All of those different factors that come into play. But being able to apply the techniques that you talked about would be very helpful in any situation. I also think that a key thing that would help is empathy. It helps us to build better relationships, stronger relationships. However, if we're transparent, not everyone has the ability, not everyone is equipped to express empathy at the level that they would like to be able to do it. It may not come natural to them. So what are some tips to help a person develop empathy so that they can strengthen those relationships?
I always define, when I'm teaching about empathy, I always define it as a feeling with someone as opposed to sympathy, which is a feeling for someone. So something happens to you, DeNeen, and you tell me about this bad situation. You had your car broke down and you're going to have to get it fixed or whatever, and I can say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. And I can feel sorry for you that you're going through that, but empathy would be my trying to put myself emotionally into your shoes and imagine if I were in the exact same situation, how would I be feeling? And when I, to the best extent I can, feel the same thing that you're feeling, now I'm empathizing with you. But I would argue that in order for any of us, especially if we're not naturally empathic, what we have to start with is our thinking, because our thinking controls our emotions. And that's something that a lot of people don't like to accept, but it's really what we think about our circumstances, about situations, about other people that determines how we respond emotionally. And so I like to start with perspective taking, which I already mentioned. We all have our own way of viewing the world. I refer to it like a unique pair of glasses, right? So we all perceive the world differently based on that unique pair of glasses that we wear. And we develop those through our experiences, through how we were raised, through our culture, through various things. And while we can adjust that as we learn and we grow, we're really not capable of completely taking off the way we view the world. But we do have the ability to try to take on some aspects of other people's view of the world. So my husband recently has realized that he's having a hard time driving at night due to glare. And so he has prescription glasses he wears, but he bought some polarized glasses that are designed to help with that at nighttime. And he puts those polarized glasses on top of his own prescription glasses, and it changes how he typically views the world. So that's how I think of perspective taking. We have to be able to stop and think about, okay, this is how I would view this situation, or what would motivate me to do this action. However, this other person and I are not the same. We have different backgrounds, different experiences, different motivations. So how might that person be thinking about this situation? What might be motivating them? Now, to a certain extent, just that process of stopping to think that people view things differently can help give us a different perspective. But when it comes to specific people, the only way we can really know if our taking on of their perspective is accurate is by asking, by checking our assumptions. So I would need to say to you, for example, you said X, and this is how I interpreted it. Was that your intent? Was that what you meant? And that gives you the opportunity to say, oh, yes, that is exactly what I meant, or no, that is not at all what I meant. And then you now have the opportunity to further explain or clarify, which helps me to then understand your perspective better. So when we take on other people's perspective, that naturally is going to also lead us to the opportunity to have empathy for them. And the more we do that, I think the more empathic we become as a whole. So I've been doing this for so long, and by no means am I perfect. I still have to constantly work at taking other people's perspectives and trying to put myself in their shoes. But I think one of the reasons I am more empathic even than I used to be is because I try to do this all the time. And yes, it takes time, but it's fully worth the effort to be able to understand people better. And when we understand people better, guess what? We have less conflict.
I think also if you couple in the approach of self-awareness, because when I'm working with clients and talking to individuals on how they can communicate better, one of the things that I stress is that you first have to know yourself, your triggers, things that cause you to respond in a certain way. And that helps you when you're interacting and communicating with others. And if they happen to say something, if you've done the work on your end on self-awareness, then you know Sarah or whomever you're talking to didn't mean it that way. I realize that that's a trigger word or a trigger phrase or response. So I then have the opportunity to work internally and make a decision at that point. I've recognized that it's a trigger for me, and hopefully I've put some measures in place that allow me to move past that trigger, refocus, and engage in the conversation.
That is very true. And in fact, I just was teaching about perception of self and perception of others and how those two impact our communication. And I always start with perception of self because we do have to understand ourselves and how we view things and how our experiences play into how we communicate. And like you said, what are those triggers? There are some well-documented biases we have when it comes to perceiving other people. And so I encourage my students to think about which of these do you struggle with specifically. So for example, one of them is we tend to assume information. We tend to assume we have more information or we know the situation better than we do. And if that's something that I tend to do, then I can catch myself doing it and correct it before it ends up playing out into some kind of a negative encounter, or assuming the worst. We naturally tend to assume the worst about other people, especially in their motivations. And so I totally agree, whether it be personal triggers based on experiences I've had from the past that are issues for me, or whether it be ways I have of perceiving others that I tend to automatically go to, and I need to catch myself on those. I have to be aware of those aspects in my life, or they're going to continue to create problems for me.
I think another area that also creates problems for us is when we're dealing with different personalities or cultural backgrounds, because I think that we sometimes bring those biases into our thinking, into the way we communicate, and those assumptions don't serve us well. How can someone adapt their communication style to avoid this?
I always tell students, and when I'm working with people, I love this rule, and I don't actually know who's credited with it, but we've all heard about the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But I came across years ago what's called the platinum rule, which is do unto others as you think they would want to be treated. And what's interesting about the difference between those two, so when I say I'm going to treat you like I would want to be treated, well, really the focus of that is still on me. Now, I understand the basis of the golden rule is to say, I shouldn't treat you in a way that I wouldn't want you to treat me, and I understand that. But when we're talking about, if I'm thinking, okay, let's see, I'm going to treat DeNeen like I would want to be treated in this situation. Well, I'm saying, let's see, how would I want to be treated? Well, if you're from a different cultural background than I am, and I treat you like I would want to be treated, I could be actually offending you because I'm going from my own knowledge, my own perspective, from me as the focus. The platinum rule tries to put you as the focus. How would you want to be treated? Well, that requires that I know something about you. I have to know who you are. I have to know your culture. I have to know your background. And in order to do that, I have to ask. I have to do some research. I have to invest some time and energy in that. And so by doing that, then that helps me to treat you like you want to be treated. And so that's the biggest recommendation that I can make across the board. There are a lot of specific skills involved in that, but just to get yourself out of the center of that equation and put the other person there and then learn about them. And then that will help you then, whatever the difference is, whether it be culture, whether it be gender, whether it be disability. That's an example I give a lot because I'm disabled. And, our tendency is to think, well, let's say somebody is trying to get in a door and they're in a wheelchair. And our thought would be, oh, well, I should go help this person. Obviously, they're struggling. They want me to open the door to help them get in. And that would be kind, right? That's what I would want someone to do for me. But the reality is, if you're not disabled, you don't know what it's like. And it may be that person really wants to be able to do that on their own because that's part of their independence, and they don't want help. And so I've experienced that a few times where I'll ask somebody that I see struggling, would you like me to get that door for you? And they might say, no, I got it. Okay, great. So I offer, but I don't assume, because I know as a disabled person there are things that I cannot do for myself. I have to have help with. But there are also things that if I can do them for myself, I want to, because it's part of me maintaining as much independence as I possibly can.
That's an excellent example, because I think many times when we see someone struggling, our instinct is to jump into action and help. And I have learned over the years to ask, is there anything I can do to assist you? Sometimes they say, yes, if you could do X, this would be great. Or either they say, no, I have it covered. And I said, okay, just wanted to make sure. Have a great day. And I keep moving. Also wanted to share with our listeners, when we talk about communicating with different people with different cultural backgrounds, one of the resources I'm going to recommend, and I actually found out about it when I was in Bible school, it is a book that's called Kiss, Bow, and Shake Hands. And what it has is it has a list of different cultural practices that individuals need to know when they're doing business, communicating, or in another country, or dealing with someone from another country. And I think that is so vital, that we don't make the assumption that everyone does it the way we do it, or it means the same thing that we think it means. It broadens our perspective and allows us to engage more successfully with individuals from different backgrounds.
Yes, I totally agree. And that's part of that research that I mentioned. The research can be you asking people from the culture. It can be you reading books or investigating things online. This is an older book, but I often will refer to it because I find it fascinating. There's a book that I think it came out in the 70s or 80s, but it's called Gestures, The Do's and Taboos of Body Language Around the World. And it gives you pictures of different gestures and what they mean, the possible different interpretations of that single gesture in different parts of the world. And interestingly, there are some parts of the world where nodding your head up and down actually communicates more uncertainty or leaning towards a negative response, as opposed to, for us in the U.S., it means yes. So you could actually be communicating the opposite, or you could be communicating something offensive in another culture by a certain gesture that in our culture doesn't mean the same thing. So you have to be very careful when you are interacting with people of other cultures. And if you really want to be able to create a good impression, which especially in business and in leadership is essential, you offend somebody from another culture and you've now lost the opportunity to interact with them, to have an influence, to establish a relationship with them. So to do your research in advance is well worth the opportunity of making sure that you are communicating as successfully as possible. Now, having said that, most people in other cultures will realize that you are from a different culture, and I think will be understanding of small things that you might do that are unintentional. But especially for us as Americans, we have a perception we've created of ourselves when we go to other cultures that everybody should adapt to us. And so we tend to blunder into other cultures and do everything the way we do and expect that everybody adapts to us. And that's a very negative impression that we have in other cultures. So I always try when I've traveled to other cultures to be as open to research, to ask questions, to try new things, and to always focus on what can I learn, what can I take in. Because then I found even if I've done something wrong, I ask, okay, so obviously I miscommunicated. How would you communicate that? And to try to learn and adapt my own behavior to be flexible.
I think it's always beneficial for us to go into it with a sense of curiosity, asking questions, and that helps us to learn, and it also puts the other person at ease knowing that you are open to learning new things.
Definitely. And it's like I said, that whole idea of taking on the other person's perspective. I go to another culture, I want to take that extra pair of lenses and put it over mine so I can see the world differently. And as I keep doing that, my view of the world continues to alter and change and adapt and become more comprehensive, I guess I would say.
I can't believe our time has come to a close. This has been a great informative session. Listeners, you'll be able to obtain Melissa's information in the comment section of this post, and I encourage you to reach out and connect with her. Melissa, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm certain that my listeners will find value in what you have added today.
Thank you so much, DeNeen. I've loved our conversation.
Listeners, until the next time, remember this is your season to rise up, be inspired, be remarkable.